Let me stop sharing now. So yeah, without further ado, I think
thanks, Gino. That was great.
For me to open up the floor to the first Madam Speaker of the House, Associate Professor in the Department of Public Law, Kelly Malt. Many of you may already be familiar with Kelly, but Kelly and I go way back. And by way back, I mean at the beginning of 2020, when I was in a class for like 4 days before lockdown started. She's a true pioneer in a field of researching pertinent issues relating to domestic violence. But today she's stepping out of her comfort zone to speak to us about what a good scholarship application looks like. She's seen many applications over the years and so has amassed a wealth of experience and insight, which I think we'll all be able to benefit from. So yeah, without further ado, I hand over to you, Professor Malt.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Gino, for that very flattering introduction. It's so nice to be with all of you and to see all of the faces in the room again. It's always one of the things that I miss most when cohorts move on to a new phase is not seeing you all so much, and of course it's made even worse in the current environment. So yeah, I was invited to speak about scholarship applications, but I'm going to also abuse the position of being the Madam Speaker and expand my ambit a little bit to also include in what I speak other kinds of applications that are analogous to scholarship applications. So, for example, I sit on the committee for the Social Legal Studies, the Law and Society Association Early Career Scholars Workshop, both the African version and the international one. And we take applications in that space too. And so I want to kind of include some, I suppose, some tips or some ideas that I've gleaned over the years through that. I think I want to start with kind of reflecting. I applied for a Fulbright scholarship way back in, I can't even remember what year, 2000 or 1999. And I think that remembering what it was like compiling that application the first time, I really had no idea of where to start. I, got the application form. I got it really late from somebody. I put an application together as best I could. And I was totally surprised when I landed up being one of the finalists. And when I went to the interview that year, I really had no idea of what to expect. And I think that that experience really gave me a lot of insight, even though it was an extremely difficult experience, because in the end, I didn't get the scholarship that year. And when you know you're down to one of the finalists, so you're on the short list and you go to this grueling interview and you do your best and you walk out feeling good, and then you get the rejection letter, I thought to myself that I'm never ever applying for anything else again. Like, I'm never putting myself out there. This is terrible. They just judge you on whatever. And so I think the first thing that I would say to you is that you have to understand that in these processes, sometimes the decision has got nothing to do with you. It's not about how good or how bad you are. It may be about funding priorities. It may be around a particular gender priority in the decision making. It may be a fit with supervisors, mentors, facilitators. There's any number of things that shape those processes that are not always about you. And the reason I say that is because shortly after I received the news, somebody called me to ask me please to promise to apply the following year. And I said, I really don't think I'm going to do that. And they said to me, your application was good and you're a good scholar. You need to understand that these things sometimes happen. And so that's the first thing I want to tell you, right? Is that sometimes rejections happen. Sometimes you fall outside of the criteria and it feels terribly personal to you. It feels like this is about how good you are, because many of us in this room, and I think this is a feature of the kind of people who are interested in academia, who are scholars, know they have good ideas, but also often feel like people are going to find out that we actually don't know nearly as much as we do know, right? That imposter syndrome, right? I think we've all mentioned it before. I have it, you have it. I know Amin sometimes feels it. So it's a shared characteristic. And so when you get bad news in terms of a scholarship, you just want to run in the opposite direction. But you need to kind of, I think, develop a little bit of a thicker skin and really think about how to improve your application. So for me, that experience of failing at my Fulbright application the first time round opened me up to, first of all, getting feedback from other people on applications before you send it in. So that's the second learning that I had. I showed my second application to lots of people and asked them to give me feedback on it. The second thing that I think I was better at in my second application was telling the story of why I should be one of the people to get the scholarship, right? So in other words, being able to articulate both why I wanted it, and secondly, why I was a good candidate to bet on. Now, most of you know, I'm sure that I don't know if there's anyone in the room that I haven't met before, perhaps. Many of you know, I'm pretty sure I've mentioned it, that I didn't finish my honors the first time round. I did everything but finish the dissertation for lots of reasons. And it was a terrible stain on my record in my own view, right? It was a disappointment that I had. And so instead of being able to find the words to describe why I hadn't finished my dissertation, my honors degree the first time around, I kind of felt too sensitive about it and shied away from it, and probably in the interview fumbled a little bit on a question about it or overemphasized it. But when I came to go in the second time around, I think I felt a little bit more like I could let go of some of the guilt that was attached to that, right? So I could understand that my record had brought me to the shortlist twice, regardless of whatever little, fails, missteps, started one degree, it didn't finish it, landed up doing something else. So I think also understanding and owning who you are and knowing that it's okay not to go in a linear direction from leaving matric to undergrad, honors, whatever, that the journey that we go on is part of what makes you special and unique and interesting to scholarship committees, and finding a way to talk about that without completely tooting your horn, being, that person that's like, oh, you definitely need me on this cohort because I'm fantastic, right? I mean, there's a real balance to strike between those two things. So I think really working on that part of an application, there is, when we get applications to the program, when I get applications to the Early Career Scholars Workshop, when I've got scholarship applications, when you read a letter of motivation or a story that feels inauthentic, it raises questions for you about the application as a whole. So that's something that I think is also important. The second thing is when you read applications that are just clearly not fit for purpose for what they're applying for, that for me is another red flag. So I am looking at admissions for next year, and one of the cover letters, the motivation letters, mentions a completely different program, right? Another one basically sounds like a cover letter for applying for articles, because it talks all about how the person, is a budding lawyer interested in this law and that law and has done internships here and there. That doesn't speak whatsoever to a program in criminology, law and society. Now, if that's your only experience, that's awesome. You do need to mention it. but you need to find a way to bridge that gap between that experience and where you're applying to. So you need to at least mention how you think that experience and a program in criminology, law and society are connected to one another, right? Because when I've got a pile of 50 applications and it looks to me like you've included a cover letter that belongs to a different program, I don't read any further than that, right? So make sure that what you're doing is fit for purpose. Think about what the committee may like to hear from you about your interest in the subject. Put some effort into that letter of motivation or that cover letter, and making sure that that really is able to put your best foot forward. The third thing that I would say is important is making sure that you get the right recommendation letters, right? That the people who are writing your recommendation letters can speak to the characteristics or qualities that the committee or the organization is going to want to hear about. So, for example, if you want to apply to a program in psychology, I am probably not a good referee, because the first question on that application is going to be, how well suited do you think Gino is to getting a master's in clinicals or to a career in clinical psychology? I have no way of assessing that. And so what I'm going to do is write that on the form. I'm going to say, unfortunately, although I've known Gino and think he's a person of this, and this quality, I'm not a clinical psychologist, and so I'm not qualified to answer. So make sure that you choose the right referees, because that's really lets down your application, not only because you've now got one less substantive reference that somebody can draw from, but also because it raises a question for the committee about whether you understand the program to which you're applying, right? Program, scholarship program, fellowship, whatever the case may be. So I think selecting referees is really important. And you need to make sure that you select people that can actually talk about your work. So I recently had an experience where somebody approached me to be a referee on their scholarship application. But I would be a potential supervisor for this person, but I have never seen a single word they have written. I don't know anything about their academic track record. I've never spoken to them in person, right? So there's no way in which I can actually give a substantive letter of recommendation to that person. So I can say, yes, that I'm willing, that their dissertation topic falls within my area, and that I see there's potential there, but beyond that, I'm not able to say anything. Now, of course, you may need to bridge that gap, right? So you need to do the work as the applicant in thinking, how can I best prepare my referee for being able to speak substantively to my application? And so there's two things that really help in that space. One, let me use you as an example, Gino or Simba. I know you both in the classroom space. I've known you since last year, right? But I don't know what you do outside of that environment, unless maybe you're my supervisee or we've chatted a lot about what else you're doing, etc. Right? I know, Gino, that you like to game, for example, but that's not going to help me on your scholarship application, right? So sometimes what you need to do is provide me your CV, but also show me what you want me to see or to highlight on that CV, right? What is the thread that you connect through the items that are on there? Because obviously you've prepared your CV in a way that should speak to the kinds of qualities, whether that's through organization, right? You don't want to put your high school leadership roles first. They need to come down at the end because they're less important on an academic CV, for example. The courses you've taken or the conferences you've presented at. So make sure you should definitely structure your CV so that it speaks to the environment in which you're seeking funding or applying to, but then show your referee what you would like them to highlight. And so it's often helpful for me to get a short paragraph from you that says, like, you know, these are some of the things that I think are relevant. So that's really important. The other thing with references is make sure that your referees know that you're using their reference letter, right? Somebody asked me for a generic recommendation letter, and I said, well, you know, generic recommendation letters aren't really usually great. And they came back and they said, well, I'd like to use it for multiple applications. You need to tell your referees, because had Cambridge University phoned me and said, Simba has applied for a master's in criminology, can you tell me a little bit about them? I would say, I don't believe that I've provided a letter of recommendation, right? And then that's really not the situation that you want to be in. So it's much better if your referee is able to speak directly to that program. So I'm pleased to be able to provide a letter of recommendation for Versha for her application for a master's degree in clinical psychology at UWC, right? So that shows that there's forethought, that the letter is going to the right place, that you've done the work of making sure that your application stands as a good application. So those are kind of some, I think those are some really important things around recommendation letters. I think you have to also make sure that you know and understand the program to which you're applying. This is whether it's a scholarship program, whether it's an academic program. Know the rules, know the eligibility and criteria, know whether you're allowed to hold particular scholarships in conjunction with other scholarships. Know whether your kind of program fits within the funding criteria, and point that out to whoever, point that out in your recommendation letter, but also point that out to whoever is writing your letter. So I'll give you a good example. The Margaret Mcnamara Foundation, Margaret Mcnamara Memorial Foundation, has scholarships that relate to women and the development issues around women and children in Africa is one kind of program they have. And then they have another kind of education and scholarship program. So it's going to benefit your application if you and I can both point out how the work, the research, your area of interest fits clearly into that set of criteria. If this is an arts-based scholarship, right? Why should criminology be, as a key focus, be funded, a project in criminology, as opposed to in ballet or in jazz music or whatever else, right? So understanding, knowing, being familiar with, and pitching your application to speak clearly, to showing how you fit into the funding criteria, also makes it much, much easier for the person who's reading your application on the other side. Other important things that I think are absolute nuts and bolts. If it says, submit me a single PDF file, you have to submit a single PDF file. And if you don't know how to do that, you need to find somebody who can help you to do that. If it says that you need certified transcripts, you need to make sure that you have certified transcripts and that you've built in the time to do whatever crazy process different universities have for receiving certified transcripts, right? Sometimes it costs a lot of money. Sometimes it takes a long time to get them. Sometimes they only will be mailed out, okay? Make sure you know things like one fellowship that I applied for, I needed an actual certified copy of my PhD diploma, which at the time was hanging framed on the wall in my office. So at like half an hour to the deadline, I had to go racing to the UCT, open my diploma out of the frame that I paid a fortune to have it framed into, copy it, take it to the police station, get home, scan it. And I think I must have lost about 20 kgs and got 5 gray hairs in the process, right? Make sure that you're not on midnight chases like that, because Those small things are the things that get you excluded right at the start. Like literally, we check applications for if they have everything, and if they don't, you're already in the no pile, right? So there you've done all of this work and not quite made it over the finish line. Other nuts and bolts things, spelling and grammar errors, for me, is going to put you at the bottom of the pile. Why should I be funding somebody or giving you one of my 20 places on my early career scholars workshop out of 250 applications if you can't even spell your application correctly? Make sure that if they ask you to give a writing sample, or if you're submitting a paper to a workshop or a scholarship or something like that, that it's of the kind of paper that they've asked you for. So the early career, that graduate scholars workshop, we ask people to submit a paper that is of a journal length, so 6,000 to 8,000 words. Routinely, we get dissertations of 80,000, 85,000 words in that pile as well, right? You're going to be kicked out right away, no matter how great your dissertation is, because I'm not going to get any mentor to read your dissertation of 85,000 words, so that you're already in the no pile. Other kinds of tips that I think are important is making sure that the formatting of your documents speaks to the environment that you're applying to. There's a school of thinking that says, or that says that presenting your CV in novel and interesting ways is useful, but certainly in academic, and I would hazard most scholarship circles, I received a CV that was kind of in a graphic format, so almost like a comic. Now, I mean, did that person stand out to me? Absolutely. Could I spend as much time as would be required to go through and find where in that graphic novel the publications were listed? Unfortunately not, right? So of course, making yourself stand out is good, but understanding your audience is also good. So there's a midpoint to be drawn. Do the work of finding out what CVs in that environment look like. Ask some people, what's important on an academic CV. The first time I applied to Fulbright, I didn't know that I should put my publications on there, right? Or conference presentations that I had done. But academic CVs have a very particular look and feel, right? There's information that we want to know from you. In other words, demonstrate for me your potential as a young scholar, because that's what convinces me that I should continue investing in you as a young scholar. So ask people to share their CVs, ask your lecturers what stands out for them in CVs, ask somebody to look at your CV and get feedback. I mean, I all say to you that getting feedback on your papers is really important. See this as kind of another paper, another product that you're producing, right? And get feedback on it. Know your application portal. I don't know how many of you have ever applied for the NRF, but that NRF application portal will literally drive you to drink, even if you don't drink alcohol. And that's because it's got ridiculous character limits. It doesn't allow you to put enters in the middle of paragraphs. It's a mess. So what you need to know from that is that you cannot start at 7 p.m. on the night that application is due, fitting your stuff in there, because it's just not going to happen. You need to have worked out the character limit of all of the pieces that you're writing. You need to download, or at least write down, all of the sections of your application, so that you make sure that you're not writing, you haven't copied and pasted something from your proposal in here, and then you find that it actually also fits here, and you have to mention it again there, but now you're wasting characters because you've only got a small space, but you're repeating yourself. So that kind of stuff is really important, because you've got to plan and think about, what do I put in here? What do I put in there? What do I put in the third place? Put yourself in the position of somebody who's going to read all of those applications and think, what is the question I'm asking here, right? What is the question I'm being asked, and how do I best showcase different parts of my scholarship, my application, in answering these questions? In other words, how do I maximize the space I have to provide as much information as possible? The other thing that I would say is, especially in those kind of application portals, get somebody to give you feedback on what that application looks like, whether it's a colleague in the class, whether it's a lecturer that you trust, because somebody else's eye will often tell you, okay, but you're overemphasizing this, or this is just way too much information about this particular, it's not really relevant, you're wasting your space. But of course, all of that means that you need to build in sufficient time to allow all of those kind of steps to happen, right? So you have to kind of see this as a task that you work on consistently. The other thing, and I think this may be my last point, is to say that keep your CV up to date. Add those little things in when you do them. If you take part in, let's say you speak at something like this, if you do a conference presentation, if you have submitted a paper, keep that all up to date, because there's nothing worse than having to add your CV and suddenly having to go through your diary, or try and think, what else have I done? So just make sure that it becomes a practice of keeping up to date with the stuff that you've done. And I think those are probably most of the tips that I have. So it's around fit for purpose. It's around doing the work of producing a good application technically. It's about following the rules and understanding them. It's about selecting good referees that can help you put your best foot forward, and about finding the words to explain why your work is important and fits within the ambit of the limited pool of resources that are being distributed. I don't know if that's helpful at all.
That is completely helpful. Thank you so much for that informative and engaging discussion, Katie. I must confess, I've missed our Thursday night methods lectures, so it is nice to listen to you again. So it's now time to ask questions, and it's quite a small group, so perhaps we can just switch on our cameras and mics and ask questions live. And
I want to add one thing, Bosha. Can I add one thing? The other thing is, have some confidence in yourselves. Honestly.
I'm starting to feel like that's directed at me.
No, it's at all of you, right? Is have some confidence in the fact that you do belong in that pool. Know that you have value and worth, and then make sure that you allow your application to put that best foot forward. Obviously don't overblow yourself, because that sticks out immediately when somebody is puffing up what they've done, or have humility, but have confidence.
Thank you so much. I think there's already a question in the chat. What matters more than in a referee, the weight of their title, or how well they know you and can write about you?
So so those things both matter a little bit, right? I mean, you want somebody with sufficient academic standing to speak for you, right? Because if it's like an assistant lecturer or a tutor, for example, right? A scholarship committee may say, well, how familiar is this tutor with what's required, with the standard that's required, etc. But having somebody that can really speak to your qualities also matters. So sometimes it's about thinking about your referees as a group. Is there somebody that knows me better in an academic sense? I can speak more to my work, and somebody more senior that, you know, and do those people know each other, and can I put them in touch with each other so that they can discuss? You know, like, could just, you know, let's imagine, Versha, that I'm not completely familiar with your project, right? But you could say to me, I'd be happy for you to chat to Alriana if you have some questions about my project, right? That gives you, there's an openness there. Then I know I can phone Alriana and say, can you know, what should I say about Versha's project? So yeah, I don't think you should get somebody who's too junior, but it doesn't help to have super senior people who are going to literally write one thin little paragraph to say, you know, Simba was a student in my class, he got 65% and attended all the lectures. That's not gonna help you.
Okay, thank you.
Not that Simba got 65%, but it was an example.
Any other questions from anyone else? Because I mean, I've probably got 500, but I will limit myself to 1 or 2. Any other questions?
I have a follow-up to that, and it's, I mean, God, how typical. It's less a question than a comment, and also less something that you can do something about. But it's so frustrating because I feel like, especially at more junior levels, like people at honors, the idea of a recommendation letter, I mean, how is a lecturer supposed to really have an idea of the qualities of one student in a relatively large class? Or, I mean, especially even undergrad, like, you know, third-year students are expected to get recommendation letters from their lecturers to get into honors. Like, how on earth are you supposed to do that? And it puts so much pressure on the lecturer. I mean, even you, I see sometimes you're like, I have to write like 10 recommendation letters today. It's totally unsustainable. And we need to find a better way to do this, because you can't possibly know that many students that well.
Yeah, I completely agree with you, Anine. I mean, you know, like when you've written as many recommendation letters as I have, eventually they all start sounding the same, right? I mean, and that's because how many ways can I say that your work is good, that you're a diligent student, that I think you know, are the kind of person we should be thinking of funding. So personally, I would like to see us move towards, there's a model that's developing in the US where people upload, there's a central repository of recommendations for an app. So you would put your transcript in one place, your recommendation letters, and they speak more generically, but everybody knows that they're going to that place to receive a more generic letter, right? In other words, that everybody pulls from that central database a set of recommendation letters that have been written about a candidate. So, I mean, I think that's a much better model than you're not writing 10 different versions of the same thing. But I think that you must remember that people who are receiving honors applications also know that about undergrad students, that they are one person in bigger classes. So my expectation of that kind of a letter is that it is more short format, etc. Whereas if somebody's writing to say that they supervise your master's dissertation, I expect to see, or your PhD, I expect to see much more about your potential as a young scholar, what you bring in a classroom, what your academic record is, what your dissertation research is about. And if I don't see that in a letter, then it raises questions for me about whether you actually know that person as well, right? So I think that's important. Yeah.
So I actually have a question. In writing a good cover letter for a scholarship application that might be aimed towards, for example, people from disadvantaged backgrounds, how do you strike the right balance between the personal and the professional? So, for instance, I don't think of myself as a disadvantaged person, but if you read those scholarship forms, technically I am the first person in my family to finish, first generation in my family, sorry, not first person, first generation in my family to finish high school and go to university. But I just feel like a little bit awkward about balancing those two things.
So I think that if you fit the criteria, I think you should be okay with saying that. And I think that, you know, you don't have to make a 7-paragraph meal out of it. You just need to, you just need to say, you know, I'm an eligible applicant to the scholarship, which is for, you know, disadvantaged young scholars because of A, B, and C reason, and then move on to your accomplishments. I mean, you need to make sure that the person who's looking at your application understands that.
Okay. So then just building on what Anine and your discussion that we just had, I often feel like I'm being a burden when I'm asking for a reference. And how do I get around that? And how, I mean, for instance, I understand that if I draft something that you can then edit it, or any referee can edit, that might help you. But then I also worry that, well, I mean, I have no idea what you'd write, so I don't want to be presumptuous. And so, you know.
So the first answer to the first question is you definitely are a burden. But the part B of that question is that we've all been a burden, right? I mean, people have written recommendation letters for me. And when I go up for promotion again, I'm going to ask people to write a recommendation letter again. And I expect those letters to be 5 or 6 pages long because they need to really speak to every part of my scholarship and teaching and whatever. So it's a goes around, comes around thing. There's a few things that help with that, right? One is giving me enough time to do it. 2 is helping me to do it. So in answer to your second part of your question, you don't have to write the whole recommendation letter for me, but you can say, you know, you may want to emphasize my teaching, my teaching experience, which I already have, which includes the following things. Now that's going to stop me from having to dig around in your CV for half an hour and then try and decide what I'm going to say about it. So you can, so think about what you would like me to emphasize in your CV and just give me, whether it's bullet points, whether it's a summary, that really helps me. And then the third thing is kind of reminders, right? Because when it's recommendation season, there's 3 due on the 20th, 1 on the 21st, that, you know, like, just make sure that I stay on top of that. And this might just be me, not everyone might be as disorganized as me on this. And then the third thing is make sure that I have the forms. Like, I don't want to have to go and scout around for what form I'm supposed to fill this out on, whether it's a free form letter on my letterhead, whether it's an application portal. If it is an application portal, tell me that I should be receiving a link from the portal shortly, because sometimes that stuff gets caught up in our spam filters at UCT or goes into, we've got this thing called an unfocused or an unfocused box or something. It routinely goes in there. So do the work for me of making it as easy as possible for me to complete your recommendation letter. And then let it go. Like, honestly, this is part of my job, Varsha. I care about my students. It's part of my commitment to all of you. I wouldn't have got that Fulbright scholarship if nobody had written a good recommendation letter for me. And it's just, it's part of how it is.
Okay, thank you so much. So any questions from the others in the room? Gino, Annie, Taryn, and RM? Any questions? Golden opportunity to ask Kelly all of your burning questions. Going once. No other questions. Okay, Kelly, it seems like I've monopolized your time. I apologize for that, but thank you so much for all of your time and all of your advice this morning. I've actually made 4.5 pages of notes. So I will definitely make use of that. So thank you so much for being here. You're welcome. Please stay. I mean, you're welcome to stay for the rest of the session as well.
Minutes, but I have another meeting just now, so.
Sure. Okay, so then our next speaker today is Lena, and I think by now she really needs no introduction. She's a familiar face and a friend, but I will take the opportunity to acknowledge and highlight all of her many accomplishments. Lena is a PhD student, a social entrepreneur, and a researcher, and she's so passionate about empowering young people that she's actually founded Africademics, which is an organization that provides 30,000 followers, including me, with scholarship information on a daily basis. So Lena, over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction. And yeah, it's so nice to be back. I'm glad to see all the familiar faces. And yeah, very excited about this initiative and very, very happy to be part of it. I have put together a little presentation because I like slides and they help me organize my thoughts. So let me try and screen share. Okay, I think I'm back. My computer always freezes briefly when I try and screen share, but I hope you can see my screen. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, so yeah, I hope my presentation won't be too repetitive, but yeah, I think I'll be touching on a few different points, hopefully, and complement on this very interesting first presentation. So I'll just briefly chat a little bit about the right timing of your application, walk through the typical application process, and also chat a little bit about the application documents, especially your CV and your letter of motivation, but I'll keep that brief because I think we've already covered quite a lot there. So in terms of when to apply, at Africademics, every year in around June, July, we get a lot of inquiries from people who have received an admission to a particular university, and now they need funding because they're starting their studies in 3 months' time. And this is always one thing that I tell people, that the biggest mistake you can really make is to start looking for funding after you've been admitted to a university. It's too late, the deadlines have passed, and it's unfortunately just not going to happen unless you know a wealthy individual that's happy to sponsor you personally. But again, we know that that doesn't really happen. So in terms of applying for your scholarship, depending on the program, in most cases, applications close between 3 and 12 months prior to your course start date. And that is something that you really need to keep in mind when you start planning for your studies and for your scholarship applications. And in terms of that, it's also important to not just look at the scholarship application deadlines, but also to keep in mind that you will have to apply for university admission. And there might be different deadlines for that. You might have to apply to different universities because you don't want to be putting all your eggs in one basket unless you have a very good reason to do so. And also keep in mind that the academic year starts at different times in different countries, right? Here in South Africa, it runs with the calendar year, which is very convenient. But as soon as you're looking to study in a European country, in the United States, then quite often it will start in their fall term or their fall semester, which is between August, September, October. So there is quite a long period between you possibly finishing your studies and starting your studies at, for example, European university, which in a way is good because it gives you time to actually focus on those applications. But obviously at the same time, you will need to bridge that gap financially. So that is just something to keep in mind in terms of the broader planning. And yes, as I said, you might have to apply for admission even before you apply for your scholarship. Some scholarships require you to already have a letter of admission ready. So once again, very important to check the requirements. And yeah, apply to more than one university, ideally, and also to more than one scholarships. Because as I said, it's competitive. You will have to deal with rejections. It's part of the process. We can't expect to walk in and get that scholarship at the first try. So spreading your application is important. And that also means more admin for you and just keeping track of those deadlines. Now, very generally speaking, those big international programs do tend to have earlier application deadlines just because they're dealing with larger number of applicants, because they have big processes running in the background, and so on and so forth. So if you're planning to apply for those prestigious big programs, then also keep in mind that you will have to apply quite well ahead of the start date of your program. Whereas sometimes those smaller local programs or funding that's allocated directly through university, that can be a little bit more flexible, and the deadlines, they tend to be a little bit closer to your course start date. But once again, it's really just about being very clear in terms of what happens when. And yeah, and what I always advise people to do is to not just do your research, but really to create a spreadsheet where you keep track of all the scholarships that might be relevant for you, that you might want to apply for, as well as the respective courses and degree programs that you need to apply for, because it gets very confusing. I mean, we all have a million things going on in our daily lives, and going through all those different requirements, sometimes they're similar, sometimes they're very different. It's impossible to keep all of that in your brain. So put it out on a spreadsheet. I'll chat about that a little bit later, and make sure you keep track of your progress. What needs to be done? What steps do I need to follow? Which documents do I still need to get? And yeah, and this is the other thing. I mean, I always feel that looking for funding and looking for opportunities, it should not be something that you do at a particular point in the year, but it should really be something that you do on an ongoing basis, right? This is part of you planning your career on a continuous basis. You never know what opportunities might be out there that you don't even know about. So keep on the lookout for scholarships, subscribe to those newsletters, keep checking the social media pages, and just make that an ongoing effort, and not just oh, I'm about to finish my master's, what do I do now? Let's look for funding. And yeah, as we heard earlier, reapply. Don't give up just because you've been rejected once and then simply discard the scholarship and think, oh no, I'm not a suitable candidate. Yeah, as Kelly said, I mean, there are a million reasons why you might not make it in a particular year. You might just not be the candidate they're looking for at that point. There might be personal preferences, professional preferences, funding preferences or guidelines. There's a million reasons. And also remember, next year, you're up against a different pool of applicants. So depending who else applies, you may or may not stand out. So it's all about, I think, being resilient and just, also using those rejections as a learning opportunity, and just to say, okay, maybe this year I didn't make it, but let me see what I can work on or what I can improve in my next application. So this is just a brief example to illustrate this application process and how long it can actually be. So I took the Chevening Scholarship. It funds full-time master studies at UK universities. And this year, applications opened on the 3rd of August. There's about a 3 application period. So they close on the 2nd of November. And then in November, this is where your application gets kicked out if it doesn't meet the formal requirements. All applications are electronically sifted or scanned. And if there is a little formal mistake, if your document isn't formatted correctly, if it's too long, whatever the case may be, they don't even look at the rest of your application. In December, the ones that have made it through are then reviewed by an actual committee. So that is where they look at your letter of motivation and the more personal part of your application. And then independent of the scholarship process, January to June is usually the time when you then need to apply for your university admission. And in this case, the scholarship requires you to apply to at least 3 UK universities, and then you need to get a letter of acceptance from at least one of them in order to be eligible for the scholarship, if you make it through until the end of the process. Then in February, shortlisted candidates are informed and are invited to submit additional documents. They are then also interviewed. So this happens usually in person through the High Commission, as far as I know, but they might have also switched to online applications. So this all kind of takes place in that February to April period while you're busy applying to universities. And then only in June, so almost a year after applications open for the first time, are the successful candidates informed, they're given an offer, and then subsequent to that, you then have to submit your university admission, provided obviously that you got one. If you didn't get one, if you didn't apply to enough universities, then even though you got the scholarship, you still in practice don't get it because you didn't make it into your course. So that, once again, it's why it's so important to not look at the scholarship on like an isolated basis, but to really keep that university application process in mind. And then, yeah, then you basically have a few months to prepare, go through all the practicalities, apply for a study permit, prepare for your move, find accommodation, which is a whole other process and which can also be quite stressful. And then September, October is when the academic year starts. So you can really see it's a full year with different steps. This is obviously one of the bigger programs. It's for a study abroad program, so it's not always that comprehensive and detailed. If you're planning to study in SA at the same university, it might be easier, but this is kind of not your worst case scenario, but like your more complicated scenario. Now, yeah, I mean, just briefly, a few words about how the application process works, but I think that's quite self-explanatory. So these days, it's usually either via email, especially like at a higher level, when you want to apply for PhD funding, maybe through your supervisor. There might not be an application portal, but for those bigger programs, I think by now most of them have those online portals with all their difficulties and potential snags that they sometimes come with. In some cases, and this is always nice, funding is awarded directly through the university for particular study programs or for particular types of candidates, where you don't even have to apply, but you just tick a box on your application form. It says, I would like to apply for this type of funding, and then the university decides or allocates. So obviously that's nice, but then at the same time, you also don't really have the opportunity to really state your case, because they often just look at your marks and certain maybe demographic characteristics when those types of funding are allocated. Yeah, interviews also more and more common, especially for the bigger programs. So that's, yeah, I mean, we're not really talking about that today, but I think that's even possibly something where one could have another session on, because obviously that's also a bit of a stress factor in that process. And yeah, and there's always this question of, do I need to submit the admission letter? Do I not need it? So just make really sure that you understand the criteria in terms of the scholarship. And yeah, once again, there's a large variety of different eligibility requirements and formalities. So I always really advise to start that spreadsheet and keep track of everything you're looking at. I have my own for Africademics, where we track scholarships that we publish. What that includes is the name of the scholarship, very simple. Where is it offered? So in which country can you study with that scholarship? What courses or course or universities does it cover? Sometimes funding is only available for a very specific course at one university, whereas other programs are very open. So you can study at any university, any field of study. But once again, it's just important to be clear about that and to possibly also adjust your own plans a little bit. Like, do I really need to study this very particular course? Or am I willing to study something that's maybe closely related, but maybe not what I initially wanted, but there's funding for it, right? Eligibility requirements, and also don't just look at the eligibility requirements in order to apply for the scholarship. But for some study abroad scholarship, especially the ones funded by foreign governments, there can be other conditions. For example, you might be required to return to your home country after graduation and stay there for 2 to 5 years. So if you're planning to pursue further studies in that country, or if you want to then, do your postdoc or work there, then getting a particular scholarship might not allow you to do that. So this is also a very important point that's sometimes overlooked. And that's especially for, those scholarships for students from developing countries, where they are then expected to go home and, make a positive contribution in their own country. That's usually how it's phrased. Application deadline, obviously, for university admission and for the scholarship, which documents are required, and what are the stages in the application process. And then I also have a field for current status of your application. Where am I? What have I done? What do I still need to do? Is it in progress? Do I still need to get those 2 documents? Because that just helps you be very clear, especially if you're applying for a large number of scholarships. And yeah, I also like to include a link to the website, just in case you quickly want to go and have a look. So that's a good structure, but obviously you can customize that as you wish. In terms of the documents, sure, every scholarship has, its own application documents, but in the end, they're often quite the same. So your copies of previous degrees, as we heard earlier, quite often there's special requirements. You might have to have them translated. They might have to be translated by a sworn translator, which is then even more expensive and more complicated. So be aware of that. They might have to be certified, and so on and so forth. They might require copies of other supporting documents. This is usually optional, but sometimes you do have the option to say, I want to, boost my application. Maybe I have done special courses. Maybe I've won awards. Maybe I've been volunteering somewhere for 10 years. So if that is an option, do submit those documents because they can strengthen your application, and that might be what makes you stand out. Then obviously there is your CV, there is your letter of motivation or your statement of purpose, depending where you're applying and what type of program you're applying for. If it's a specific research program, then they might also want you to elaborate on that or submit a research proposal. And yes, then there are our famous reference letters. And research proposal might be part of it depending on the level of study you're at. And your letter of admission, sometimes before, sometimes after you get your scholarship admission. And yes, be very clear about those formal requirements, because you don't want to sit there at the last minute and then you don't just have to certify it, but you might have to have it translated professionally. And that's not something you're going to get done at the last minute. I had to have that done. And it was just a very short one, German to English. And I scouted around, and I think it still took a week because those guys are also busy, those translators. So in terms of your CV, I think we've already covered quite a bit. So I'll just go through those very briefly. Very, very important to have a tailor-made CV, not just in terms of not drafting a job application CV, but a scholarship application academic CV, but also to customize it to each individual application, as far as that's possible, of course. And focus on your relevant achievements. Yes, include those publications, awards, and other things, but also make sure they are relevant to what you're applying for. And this is a general guideline. Usually they do tell you how long your CV should be, but don't send a 5-page CV unless it's required. And if you're at an early stage in your career, don't include irrelevant stuff just because you want to make your CV long. Like, you don't need to include the catering job you had in high school just because you want to fill up the pages. Put the relevant things there, because otherwise you're also wasting the reviewer's time. They now have to sift through all those pages and pages of what you did in high school, and in most cases it's not relevant unless you're applying for bachelor's and it's specifically asked for. Then, in some countries, and this comes back to how do I format a CV for a particular region or for a particular field of study or work. In some countries, it's common to include a picture in your CV. In other countries, that's very frowned upon. So find out where are you applying, in which country, and what does a typical CV in that country look like. And I also, sometimes there's different ways of doing this, but usually start with the most recent achievement or course of study. But that's also depends a little bit on preference. Be consistent with your formatting. You don't want to see things all over the place. It must be very easy and very clear and very easy on the eye for the reviewer to read your documents. And yes, have it spell checked. Make sure you have it spell checked, not just by word, but also by an actual person, and ideally someone where you can, trust their level of spelling. Because if it's your buddy who's sitting next to you in class, they might also not spot those little typos and those little grammar errors. And yes, send it as a PDF, unless required otherwise, or whichever formatting requirement is put forward. Structuring your CV, there are a few musts. Your personal details and contact details, make sure they are 100% correct, make sure they're updated. There's nothing worse than sending a CV with a typo in your email address. And also include things like your nationality, especially for scholarships, because sometimes they are only available to people of a certain nationality. So it's those little things that should be part of that. In some countries, it's common to include a short summary or a short introductory statement in your CV. Again, depends what you're applying for, depends on whether you feel that makes sense. So that can be something like, I am a young scholar in the field of whatever, looking for opportunities in this and this and this and that. It's usually more suitable for a job application, but it might be something you can consider for your academic CV as well. Then obviously education, academic background, professional experience, those are musts. And then if you have something that you can put in those other categories, like other relevant qualifications, certificates that you've gained, languages spoken. Once again, if you're applying to study abroad, it might be good to include that if you speak the local language, or if you study linguistics or international business. Publications, presentations, if you've done any. Obviously, if you haven't done any, then you don't include the title and then put nothing underneath, but you just leave it out. Grants, scholarships, awards. Memberships in professional associations can be useful if you're applying at a higher level, research orientated kind of position, also because it shows that you're well connected, that you emphasize networking. So yeah, if you're a member of academic associations, it might be good to put that here if relevant. And then obviously your references, or references available upon request if they are provided in another part of your application. Yeah, on the Afracademics website, we do have 2 little articles on that. They were written by SciStaff, which is an academic recruitment agency. So have a look. They also provide some useful tips there from an academic perspective specifically. And yeah, in terms of what it looks like, there's different formats. Obviously, this is kind of the more classic format of your CV. You have your personal details, an address, etc., your name. This is one with a picture. Then there's your education, your work experience listed chronologically. And this is kind of a more modern format. I quite like it, and it's very useful if, for example, you can only submit a 1-page CV. So this is a nice way of getting more information on the page, but obviously you still have to be careful not to overload it. But yeah, here you have on the left this little stripe with your personal details, your picture, and a few keywords. And then you use the rest of your page here they did include a profile. As I said, that's optional. And then at the bottom, you also have reference available upon request, because that also takes up less space. So that's a nice way of putting more info on a single page if you have to. Yeah, letter of motivation. So what do we write this letter for? What is the purpose of it? It's really to complement and elaborate on what you have stated in your CV. It's not a repetition of your CV where you just kind of put everything in words or in longer phrases, but it's really supposed to fill and address any gaps that there might be in your CV, and also to really introduce you as a person. I mean, your CV says what you've achieved and you know, what awards you've won and so on, but this is really also where you can bring your personality in and what makes you stand out. And as we've heard earlier, yes, it's good to stand out, but know your audience, be careful how much you want to stand out and in what way. But this is really where you can explain those gaps or breaks, like if you've changed careers, or if you've changed your degree, if you have any gaps in your CV, maybe there were personal challenges, maybe you had to look after your mother who was elderly and took a year off because of that. There's nothing wrong with that. Maybe you had a child, you know, it's also not something that you put in your CV, they just see the gap. So this is where all these things go. And guys, it's okay to change your mind about something. It's okay to have those gaps. As long as you have a good reason for it, or as long as you can come up with a good reason for it, or as long as you can put it into nice words that sound convincing. Obviously, I'm not encouraging you to, you know, embellish things, but usually we do have good reasons. And even if we decide to take a gap year to travel and get to know the world and have fun, then this is a year of getting to know different cultures, learning languages, figuring out what you want to do, rather than plunging into something without being clear about what you want in your life. So if you explain it in that way, it's perfectly acceptable. It's a good thing, actually. So, and yes, clarify your motivation, why you are applying, not just for a scholarship, but for this particular scholarship. I often see letters where people say, yeah, I need funding because I don't have the money. Well, that's all good and well, but then why must we fund you, right? So once again, make it very specific. Don't just say, yeah, well, financial need. but say, okay, this scholarship focuses on, it offers a mentorship component and it really zooms in on this particular issue that I'm very passionate about, and so on and so forth. Explain how it relates to what you've already done and what you want to do. And yeah, guys, like I always say, there's really no such thing as a template for that letter. Like people always ask, like, can you show me a good letter? It's like, yeah, we can, but it's not going to work for you because it worked for that person with that history and with that CV. So yes, there are general guidelines on how you should do it, but what exactly goes in, it really depends on each individual person. What usually does go in is, and I mean, there's different ways of structuring it. This is just one that I like. Obviously, you start with a captivating introduction. Who are you? What are you applying for? Why are you applying for it? Make it punchy, make it stand out. And then you kind of go through, okay, who are you? Where are you coming from? What have you achieved? Then where are you now? What are you doing? And why are you applying for this particular scholarship? Why are you a good candidate? And then also related to the future, like don't just stop where you are now, but say, okay, in the future, this is what I would like to do with the funding that I received through the scholarship with that particular degree, and how does it all kind of tie in together. And yeah, also important for formality's sake, just as you know, if you're writing a paper, you end with a conclusion, you don't just stop, but you wrap it all up, you summarize it quickly, thank the reviewers for their time. It's a nice touch and it does make a difference. And yeah, sign it, be it typed, be it handwritten, but it is a letter after all. So those little things really do make a difference. Again, the length, yeah, it depends. They usually tell you, but generally 1 to 3 pages long. Yeah, structure it nicely. Do include a headline. Don't just start writing, but you know, they do want to see what is this document. If you have the name and the title of the person who will be reading your application, for example, if you're applying for a PhD scholarship, you know, this will be my supervisor, then yeah, address it to them. It does make a difference. It shows that you've done your research. And yeah, this is, it's a difficult one to do, but it's an important one to have in mind. Don't make those empty generic claims like, yes, I'm a hardworking, driven, reliable, responsible individual. Your reviewers have read that a million times. You can put those in, but then say, my upbringing in a rural area has taught me resilience, which I have also demonstrated throughout my career by securing 2 previous scholarships and by getting excellent marks while working at the same time. So make it explicit. And yes, check the scholarship website and the program description. You will see keywords there. The values of the scholarship foundation, the target audience of the scholarship foundation. What does it do? What is important to them? What are they looking for? And use those in your application because it shows that it's tailor-made. It shows that you're a good candidate. Obviously, they must be applicable to you, but it's a nice little trick to make your application more relevant. And yeah, once again, I think we've already talked about this. Split it up into paragraphs. Don't just give them one big block of a 2-page text. Check the formatting, and yeah, thank them at the end. So yeah, last but not least, this is also just a quick summary of some of the points we've spoken about. So really, guys, those application and formatting requirements are so crucial. It's not what will get you the scholarship, but it's what will get you thrown out before people even get to reading the rest of your application. So something stupid like misspelling the name of the scholarship or having a typo somewhere will basically nullify all the work and all the time that you've put into writing your letter of motivation and drafting your CV, because application gets thrown out because before people even read it. And yeah, when you send documents via email, and I also see that quite often, people just put the attachments there and then they send you an empty email with those attachments, and then the scholarship reviewer or the professor has to figure out, what is this? Who is this? Why is this rude person just sending me random documents? So just put a little paragraph there. Dear professor, what, my name is XYZ, I'm applying for this scholarship, please find attached, and so on and so forth. And yes, guys, use previous scholarship applications. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time you apply. You don't have to do all the work again and again and again, but triple check everything. Don't just double check, triple check it. file names, dates on your documents, who is it addressed to, what's in the documents, and so on and so forth. Once again, that's what will get your application thrown out. And then, yeah, you were trying to save time by recycling one, but you've just wasted a very good scholarship application because of a tiny little formality. And yeah, have them reviewed, ask for feedback. And I always say this, ask for feedback from qualified individuals as far as that's possible. Yes, professors are busy, but don't ask your little sister, rather ask your older cousin who works in HR and who looks at CVs on a daily basis, for example, or ask the tutor that you're working with. They're still a little bit more experienced than you might be. And yeah, guys, when you get feedback, I mean, feedback is great and it's very, very helpful, but also remember that feedback is always a personal thing. So depending on where the person giving you feedback is coming from, their feedback may or may not be relevant for your particular scholarship application. So someone working in HR might be really, really good at giving you advice on your CV, but they might not know anything about an academic CV. So keep those things in mind and be selective when you use feedback. And then you can always contact the scholarship organization for info, for clarification, but only do it after you've checked every little page on their website, because people get annoyed when they get emails and then you ask for something that's clearly stated on the website. And you know that kind of does create a negative impression, because now you're being lazy and now you didn't do your work properly. So rather don't do that. But if it's not there, then do ask. That's what contact persons for scholarships are for. Yeah, more and more, there's also resources, tutorials, webinars offered by scholarship foundations, really, really useful. You have alumni talking about their application. So check the social media pages, check the websites. It's really, really super useful. And yeah, last piece of advice, guys, don't put all your eggs in one basket and reapply if needs be. And this is just a very, very quick one on also how academics can support you free of charge. We do share scholarships on social media. So this is not about the application. This is just about finding scholarships on the newsletter, on the website. On the website, we also have advice from our scholarship ambassadors, all of whom have applied for scholarships. So check those out, especially if you're looking for a particular scholarship. We share scholarships on WhatsApp, on Telegram, and then we have 2 new things that are coming up, which I'm very excited about. So we are working on a proper scholarship database, searchable database, which will be up on our website later this year. We're just busy getting all the entries done. So then rather than having to browse through an entire Facebook page, you can just look Master Scholarship in that country for those people. Very excited about this. And also through our scholarship ambassadors, we will also be launching a portal on our website, probably next month, where scholarship seekers and scholarship applicants can submit a request for a personal consultation. So we will then pair you up with one of our ambassadors, and they, all of whom, you know, as I said, have obtained scholarships. They've also gone through a 6-month training program. They will offer personal advice to you, obviously depending on availability. So we'll have to see how many inquiries we get. But this is a new thing that we're launching. And I really, really hope that this will also help many of you and everyone out there to get through that grueling application process. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. And handing back to our team.
Lena, thank you for an outstanding and excellent presentation. Really much appreciated. Again, I've made several pages of notes and really have tons of questions. But before we get to my questions, let me open the floor for questions from everyone. I'd love to hear from all of you. If you could please put your mics on and ask your questions.
I have a question. Lena, I've seen on other students' CVs that they usually include previous scholarships that they have received, as if it's like an award. Is that standard? Are there prestigious awards that you should stick with if you want to do that? Or can you just say, listen, I have all these bursaries and they are important to me, so I'm putting it here? Where do you draw the line?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Well, and obviously, if you have this long list, then you're in a very, very good position. Yeah, look, I think once again, it depends a little bit on relevance also. So if it's something that is completely not in that field of study that you're applying for, then you may want to not mention it unless you have the space to do so. So there's always a little bit this trade-off of how long can my CV be? What other sections do I want to include? If you don't have anything in the languages, memberships, whatever other sections, and you actually do have the space, then yeah, list those awards. If it's not at the expense of something else. If you have limited space, then yeah, make sure it's relevant in terms of the field of study. And obviously, if you have to choose between prestigious ones and not so prestigious ones, then yeah, sure, go with the prestigious ones and kick out the other ones if you have to. So yeah, I think that would be my advice. But yeah, I think generally those, like including those awards, rather than other things like maybe certificates or courses that you've taken, is more valuable, because it already shows that other juries or committees have considered you worthy of being funded. So I actually think this is one of the categories where you should try not to exclude too much if you have the luxury of having lots of things that you can put there.
Thank you, Lena. There's a question in the chat from Simba. He's saying that there's a school of thought that when you're applying for a scholarship, it's much better to apply closer to the deadline because this might increase your visibility. So your chances of the application being seen. Is there any truth to this?
Oh, this is a very good question. I'm not sure if there's an absolute truth to this. I would say it depends very much on the application process, because obviously, if you're dealing with an application portal that has a certain deadline and that first electronically sifts all the applications, then it really doesn't matter, because the sifting and the reviewing only happens after everybody has submitted their stuff. So in that case, it really doesn't matter. If it's if it's maybe a PhD scholarship that is, awarded by a particular professor and it's more of a personal application process, look, it might be true, but at the same time, if you're submitting super close to the deadline, that also means that maybe your planning wasn't that great. So my personal feeling is that, no, I wouldn't count on that being a thing. But then again, I'm not on any scholarship committee, but just from my personal feeling, I would just say, look, when your application is ready, then send it. If you want to give yourself more time, okay. But, it's also very possible that if they already received 10 great applications very, very early in the process, and they've had a lot of time to look at those candidates and to look at them again, and they're already very present in their minds because they've been on this application list for so long, then your last minute application might also not be as convincing, just because they've already kind of fixated their attention on those early applicants. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense, sort of strategizing. I'm not sure that it's necessarily the best approach. I have a question. I have two. The first one, or let me just ask one. You've reiterated the point that we have to develop a thick skin. It's competitive. Apply for as many scholarships as possible. But obviously, this is a sort of time-consuming and tedious process. I'm just saying it like it is. So when you say apply, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. I mean, how many baskets are you seeing? How many applications is average to have going at a time?
Sure. Actually, I don't know. My advice would be, once again, it depends on what you're applying for and what you're doing specifically, because obviously, don't put all your eggs in one basket, but also don't apply for random scholarships where you only meet 3 of the 10 eligibility criteria. So yes, apply for what is relevant in your field and where you say, okay, at least I meet the formal criteria. And then it really just depends on how much time and energy and effort you have and how many you can apply for and how many there are out there. So I don't think it makes sense to give you a number, but it's more this personal consideration of, okay, how much time can I invest in my scholarship search? Because that also determines how many opportunities you will find. And then out of those that you found, how many am I realistically a good candidate for, just in terms of meeting the basic requirements? Because also, as Kelly said, everything beyond that, it's really out of your hands. Who are they really looking for? You won't know that unless you're part of the committee. But as long as you meet the formal requirements, and as long as this is, you know, a scholarship that's relevant for you and you have the time, apply for it. Obviously, it's also very much a cyclical thing, because those applications do tend to happen at a certain time of the year. So it might also make sense to say, you know, okay, I see this time of the year, a lot of, you know, application periods are closing. So let me just try and set some time aside at that time of the year. It's quite often like, I think February, March, April, there's quite often a few deadlines, and then again like mid-year and later in the year. But again, depending where you want to study. So try and identify those cycles, and then make sure you have time around that period to really zoom in on your scholarship applications. I think, yeah, that'd be my advice.
Thank you so much for that. I just want to invite questions from everyone else. Yes, Anine, please go for it.
So, I mean, I get you probably don't have the answer to this, but I think it's totally crazy that in Germany they like a picture on your CV. What on earth can be the reasoning for that? Like, that just seems like an invitation for discrimination. Like, why would they want to see what your face looks like before they even decide to interview you?
Yeah, it's a very good question. That is exactly the debate that is happening in Germany. Because in Germany, it was just always normal that there would be a picture on your CV, because apparently, I don't know where it came from, but I'm just assuming it's like, well, okay, if you're maybe they just have a better impression of you, or maybe it was just something that someone came up with at some point. Maybe it also stems from an era where society wasn't as diverse as it is now. Very possible. But yeah, that is exactly the debate that is happening. And there have been studies that actually show that, you know, if you, in Germany now, if you apply and your name sounds foreign, you're more likely to be kicked out. If you are Black, or if you are Arabic looking, you're also more likely to be thrown out. So yeah, it is a problem, which is why in other countries it's completely taboo to do that, because it would be inviting that kind of criticism. I think at some point they were even discussing the name issue, because it's the same thing. You know, if in Germany you apply with a foreign sounding name, then statistically speaking, you are less likely to be hired, regardless of your qualifications. So I almost feel, you know, even that is something where we're like, well, okay, yeah, a name is, it's good to know who you're talking to, but at the same time, what does it say about you and potential bias that employers or committees might have? I mean, the only good thing is that when it comes to scholarship, then diversity is usually a plus rather than a minus. But yeah, I completely agree with you that it is actually crazy, especially in that pre-scanning stage, because obviously you will eventually meet them and they will eventually see you, but at least until then, they've only judged you based on your achievements and not on what you look like. So I completely agree.
Yeah, that's the exact question I wanted to raise as well, because I was just like, it's such a contentious issue, because I know people who have submitted their CVs, not for scholarship purposes, but for employment, and they've immediately been discriminated against. But on the other hand, like, they've been accepted for jobs or positions just because there is a certain quality, or there is science behind a person's facial features that make them more trusting or inviting, or speaks to the character. So I get both views, but it was something for me that I did want to ask you about, and if it was a thing just within Germany, or have you seen this across multiple instances and scholarship applications? And yeah, what is your advice to students who would be in the same position as me, as wondering if they should or not put themselves out there in terms of, yeah, that?
Yeah, look, I mean, the good thing about those application portals is that they don't usually ask you to like upload a picture or something. And then quite often, rather than actually uploading your CV, you have to go through all those forms where you enter where you studied and what you did and so on and so forth. So in a way, that has a little bit eliminated this need to actually draft the CV and then decide whether or not to put a picture on. look, I think it's more and more acceptable to not put a picture, even in countries where you would traditionally do that. And I don't think they would discriminate against you for not putting a picture. So, you know, if you're hesitant in that regard and you're not really comfortable with the whole picture thing, even though it might be common in that country, I think it's not a deal breaker if you don't put it there. And I mean, obviously, reviewers are also more and more conscious of formatting standards in other countries, because most of those international foundations that award scholarships, obviously they receive CVs from different, you know, countries and people from different backgrounds, and most of those people have also applied to, you know, with another CV or like a differently formatted CV to some kind of position. So I would say if you're uncomfortable with it, then leave it out. And I haven't really seen any scholarships that specifically ask for that. If anything, it's then your university, but that's because they need to print your student card, and that's a different story. Yeah.
And then the last question I wanted to ask is, like, on that whole slideshow of your timeline for planning ahead for certain applications, I mean, it's all like great at the, how can I say, the format that you use, but like, how practical is it for students? And is there any like tips that you can give for candidates to kind of follow up with that procedure? Because it is a lot of information to take in, and it is very much, how can I say, specific, and you need to have the exact documents or whatever. And so, yeah, just any tips that you can give to students to make sure that they meet the deadlines and that they are keeping track of where they are in terms of their application progress.
Yeah, look, I think it really comes down to this very basic skill of time management and organizing yourself, which you don't just need it for your scholarship application, but also for your studies. I mean, as you go through your bachelor's and your undergrad, you always have to deal with deadlines and submitting papers and assignments and that sort of thing. And I think most people have worked out a strategy that works for them. Be it, I mean, I set reminders on my phone, or I have this usually very old school thing. Like, I work with an actual diary, and every day I have like my to-do lists in here. So this is what my days look like with all the to-dos on that day. And so I just make sure that when there is a deadline, then I set myself a reminder a week or two before the deadline, depending on how obviously extensive the thing that I need to do is. So use your phone, set reminders on your phone if that works for you. Use a physical calendar if that works for you. And yeah, and just make sure you do the prep work. So the first time you look at the scholarship and you think, yeah, this is something I want to apply for, then immediately make a list of those deadlines and note them wherever you record your to-dos and your calendars and your appointments and that sort of thing. And I think that's also one of the reasons why I say make it an ongoing process. So get into the habit of being on the lookout for opportunities, and get into the habit of having those different deadlines and to-dos in your calendar, because that way you're kind of used to it. It's kind of always at the back of my mind, should I be working on some application, or isn't there a deadline coming up? So just also to create that awareness. And I was going to say something else and now I forgot, but yeah, maybe it'll come back to me. But I think it's, really just time management skills, general time management skills. And there's lots of strategies and tools out there on the internet, creative ways of doing that. And it's, once again, it's such a useful skill, not just for your scholarship application, but for anything in life. And maybe that thing that I forgot, maybe it'll come back to me now.
Maybe if I can also just repeat what Lena said earlier about using Excel for it. And you can even set up like a Gantt chart in Excel to track what you should be doing at the.
And then also on that note, because if you do that Excel sheet, then once again, make a note in your calendar once a week on a specific day. You check that sheet and you see if you've made any progress, if you should be doing anything this week. So also make a routine out of that. Like, don't create that Excel and then let it rot on your desktop. But make sure you set those reminders to check it regularly. and to see, oh, okay, next week I need to do this, and the week after there's that deadline coming up.
Thank you so much, Lena. I mean, I really like that that tip of making it a routine to just check in with your Excel spreadsheet once a week or whenever you can, or as per a routine, a schedule, because otherwise you're not going to do it. You've just flooded with other stuff. So thank you so much for that practical tip in particular. Any final questions? I have one, and then I think we will wrap up. Can people get involved with your organization?
Of course. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what we've been doing this year is to kind of run the first round of the Scholarship Ambassador Program, whereby we put out a call, people applied to become ambassadors, we trained them through an online course over 6 months. So this year it was quite a long thing, also because we were still trying out how it works. So it was literally an online course, different sessions on different aspects of scholarships, different assignments, just for people to learn all those basics. And now our first group is starting to actively advise scholarship applicants and scholarship seekers. And this is really the part of the program that we're going to grow over the next few years. So early next year, or maybe even later this year, there will be another call for next cohort of people who are young scholars who are interested in supporting others, who want to go through that course. We'll probably make it shorter, maybe a 4-month course. It's usually with like 1 activity per week, so it's also not super demanding. And yeah, so that's one way to get involved. And obviously the course is also a nice opportunity for the participants to learn all about applying for your own scholarship. So that's the added benefit that you have. And then hopefully, yes, and then hopefully afterwards you will be open to assisting others on you know, once a month or once every 2nd week. That is then really up to you. So yeah, that's the main way where we're currently looking for supporters, but also for people, you know, at universities. And that's another project that we're looking into, to spread the word about scholarships, to spread the word about Africademics, and to almost be, you know, university or campus representatives, rather than just, you know, being on the scholarship advisory team. So that's also something that we're looking at, to really establish a presence at different universities and different faculties and different student groups. So that's absolutely another way where you can get involved. Or also, I mean, this is a very informal way. If you come across scholarships, then send them to us, and then we will share them with the network.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that information. I'll be Googling that at the end of the seminar today. Lena, on behalf of the team and everyone that attended today, I can't thank you enough for an outstanding and wonderful presentation. A fair warning, Annie and I have already exchanged messages. There's going to be another seminar. We're going to be imposing upon you again to come and speak to us. So thank you so much. And I think that in closing, I'm just going to hand over to Simba to end off the session. Thank you so much.
So yeah, again, thank you, Lena. It's unfortunate that Kelly left, but thank you to the both of you for such an informative webinar. And yeah, and I'm sure to the people who attended, I'm sure they learned something as well. And I just want to say that this has been brought to you by the Criminology Students Development Society Committee. And that comprises of Varsha, Gino, Anine, Annie, Izu in absentia, and myself. And we hope to continue to provide more of these webinars and even expand on the topics that we touch on. And yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you so much for spending your time on this Friday. I hope everyone goes out and enjoys their Friday, though it looks gloomy in Cape Town. I hope it'll get better, I doubt. But yeah, thank you so much.